What if the life you are living is built on contracts you never consciously signed? Hi everyone, I'm Yusuf, your host, and today, in this episode of Cosmic Confluence, we are decoding the three C's: contract, construct, and conform, and how the invisible agreements we carry quietly engineer our visible world and the rooms we think we are allowed to walk into. If you've been stuck on a one-way street of leftovers, always giving, rarely receiving, this conversation is your return into a two-way river of thought, action, and spirituality. Our guest has spent 20 plus years bridging the seen and the unseen, interpreting thousands of dreams, advising seekers and skeptics, leaders, and everyday humans, mapping the SeeLink of the Creator through history, culture, and personal destiny. They tell the truth with humor, connect dots across time, and make the mystical usable. Let's step off the autopilot of conformity and step into contracts we actually choose. Listener, meet my incredible guest, Caleb Matthews. Caleb, welcome to the show, and it is an honor to have you here with us.
Thank you, Yusuf. The honor is mine, and honor to be here with you on Cosmic Confluence. I'm really excited for our conversation today. I think it's going to be very enlightening for our listeners, and ultimately leaving an imprint of encouragement to our audience today.
Indeed, it will be. So, Caleb, when you look at the invisible contracts most of us carry, like family rules, religious scripts, success myths, what's one early contract you can name that silently shaped your choices?
Early contract that I made, that's a good question. For me to elaborate on that, it would be the contract that I made with God. And I do not believe it is possible for any of us to get through life without connection from the source, and that is from God. If we are left to our own devices, just going back into the Garden of Eden example, in creation, in the beginning, God created man and woman in the Garden of Eden. In his image, he created them. And where the trouble began in the history, in the timeline of our human history, I believe, was when mankind partook of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that connection of doing it ourselves through the cult of self versus actually connecting with God from the tree of life. And that's where that contract is so important, to make that contract with God. So for me, at the age of 6 years old, I made my contract with God when I first started receiving dreams the night season, and I started to engage with these dreams. I've started to look for understanding on what they could mean, and started to search the ancient texts, the scriptures, and ultimately finding my connection with God, with Jesus, and really having that influence. We talk about cosmic confluence, and really the title is really interesting because there's a connection to the cosmos, yet there's that practicality of that influence and confluence of being conformed into that image of not the world system, but our system where we're connecting with God. So for me, my journey of my first contract and my most important contract began at the age of 6 years old, when I started to engage with God, not just in the night season, but in the daytime, and accepting Jesus into my life.
That's a very inspiring and mesmerizing journey you had. Especially you started very young at the age of 16, where most of the people, especially like my personal example, I was figuring out what subject to choose in for my master's or my bachelor's. And yeah, you really did well. You see, personal construct is the architecture that turns belief into behavior. What are the core beams like mindset, ritual, or community that, stabilizes these contracts or constructs?
I would say our three-part being, and this is one of the things that I talk about within the SeeLink, just to bring our audience up to speed for those that are not familiar with what I talk about with our three-part being. This is the SSB method: spirit, soul, and body. I believe that each human being on this planet, we are all created as spiritual beings with a mind, will, and emotions, but with a body, a physical construct. We're not just two-part beings, So often in Western culture, especially, the Western culture pushes a mindset and body activation, but really neglects the spiritual. And the farther east that I've traveled in my life, and the more people from the east, like yourself, Yusuf, and the Eastern cultures I've spoken with, the more of a cultivated, healthy balance between spirit, soul, and body that there is that I have found in my experience. And really, I think this is one of the greatest battles in our age, in mankind, in the age of humanity, is this battle between spirit and soul. The soul isn't an evil thing, it's not a bad thing, but if it's left to its own devices, we can lose that connection, that harmony, that frequency with that cosmic confluence, which is connection to the spirit, connection to our spiritual part, then to our emotional part, then our physical part. And without the spiritual part, it's like a stool with 3 legs. If you get rid of one of the legs of the stool topples over. So as 3-part beings within our DNA of design, within building that contract that we have with God, it has to come from that interwoven connection between spirit, soul, and body. If it's only the soul and only the body, then we're eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil again, and we're not partaking of the tree of life, which Jesus is clear of that he is the bread of life, that the spiritual, that connection to God, partaking of the invisible and manifesting that in the physical is really what the human existence is all about.
Wow. You explain it very simply using the stool example, and so hard, like it's very hard to digest this information at once, but you really did tell us through very quite simple example. Thank you so much for that. Some people might argue that renegotiating contracts is like a privilege or a luxury because some people can't opt out from, let's say, culture norms or let's say economic norms. So what your advice would be for them?
Well, I would say, just to use an example, is that just because we are raised with cultural contracts, we are raised maybe with a family history, or raised with a cultural conformity or an environment that we're in, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to adhere to that environment. And now I'm going to use an example for this. My mother was one of my closest friends. She was raised in an alcoholic home. Her parents, unfortunately, my grandparents, were alcoholics. And if she would have listened to, okay, well, this is the culture that I was raised in, this is just the contract that I was raised in, this invisible contract of, well, look, if my parents are alcoholics, I guess I have to be an alcoholic. And if she accepted that, then I guess she'd become an alcoholic. But she did not accept that. She said, no, I'm not going to be an alcoholic. Just because I was raised in that environment does not mean that I'm going to actually walk out that negative contract. And that's just an example, one simple example, that just because we're raised in an environment, in a soil, in a garden that might not necessarily be fruitful, it does not necessarily mean we have to take on that contract. No different than maybe there's a mindset, maybe there's a mentality, maybe there's something that your elders or family or those around you, or maybe even like your peers, and saying, let's delve into the peer pressure of this contract. Because you see, within the 3 C's, the SeeLink, we talk about conform, construct, and contract. And within each of those 3 C's is the letters C-O-N, and that creates con. And so oftentimes, many people may have heard of the terminology, a con job, of being conned into something. Well, conformity, contract, construct, they all begin with con. And to build that conformity, to build that contract, that construct, it all begins with either accepting the con job or not accepting the con job, of not being conned into something. Well, when you and I, Yusuf, or our audience, we decide, okay, we're not going to be pressured or conned into something, then we push back against it and we create our own construct, our own conformity, where we're not conformed into the pattern of this world, because it says in the Bible, in the book of Romans, do not be conformed to the world's pattern, but be conformed by the renewing of your mind, your spiritual mind, your soul, and ultimately your body. And when we are conformed into that system of God, we build that contract. And when we build that correct contract, we are establishing our walk and our life with God, and we're not accepting just because there's a contract that's there that's always been that it has to be. So we can decide. We have the purpose and we have the ability. And I just want to encourage our audience, as you're listening to this right now, step back and maybe do a little self-assessment. What are the contracts that are in my environment, that are my peer pressure environment is pushing around me, that my culture, my family might be? Maybe it's a negative contract that I'm not supposed to take. And what are the positive contracts? What's the lineage of the rich heritage of my family or my environment, my culture, where I'm supposed to continue a contract, even if it means making a stand for that contract will cost you something? Because anything good in life, anything God in life, anything pure and good and noteworthy is going to cost you and I something. Just keep that in mind as you're building your contracts. What do you think, Yusuf?
I think that you explained it very well. Like contracts, they start with conning yourself. Maybe something that, let's say, I impose on myself. I con myself, but it might not be beneficial for me. I might be self-sabotaging myself in believing it that it belongs to me, it's sourced to me. As you said, my first step would be to step back, think that it aligns with my soul, it aligns with my spirit. And if that is okay, I should move on. And if not, I should, start renegotiating that contract. Am I right?
Exactly. Take a little inventory of our senses, an inventory of our spiritual connection with God, our invisible contracts that we've made or not made in the spirit, our contracts that we've made emotionally and mentally, our contracts we've made in relationships or friendships or investments or areas where we're putting our time. Because contracts are all around us, everywhere in life, whether it be our contract with God, our walk with God, or our walk with friends or family, other people, our contract with what job we're going to take, what schooling we're going to go through, and ultimately where we're going to invest our time. These are all contracts within the time pie that I like to call the important, the not important, and the average. So think of it, audience, as a time pie that you create. If you were to create a pie and you were to put in these pies, what's in my life that is important, what is not important, and what is just average expectation. And see how much time that you're using in each of those areas and those elements and what contracts you're building. If most of your time and my time is invested in average or not important things, then we're building the wrong contracts. If our time is invested in important things more than the average and the not important, then we're building the right ones. Of course, we still have to pay taxes, get our groceries, be healthy. Those are all average things. Not important things would be, who's going to win the next cricket game, or who's the team that's going to win the league this year in the sport, in the football or the tennis, or who's the next star tennis player going to watch on the television after work. These are fun things, but they're not really important things. And then important things would be my contracts with God, my relationship with God, my relationship with my friends, my relationship with my family, my time that I'm investing in my health. These are the important things. So you're right, Yusuf. It is really stepping back and seeing what we're conning ourselves into that's not built for us, and what construct we're building of that conformity, the proper conformity, where we're conforming ourselves into the image of God by walking in his creation the way it was also always supposed to be, back to Eden.
True, very true. But some might argue that conformity is like a social glue. It makes people together. It makes people unite. And are we too quick to demonize conforming?
It's a good question. I would say there's a flip side to conformity. There's two sides to conformity. Conformity in the negative is, you're being in somebody else's image, you're taking on somebody else's armor you're not supposed to. That's the negative connotation. And the positive connotation that I touched on just a bit with our, relationship with God is the scripture verse I spoke about before in the ancient text of do not be conformed to the pattern of this world. But what's the next part? That's the positive spin. But be renewed by the transforming of your mind. Well, The proper conformity, the positive conformity, is when there's a renewal of our mind, our spiritual mind, our physical mind, and our entire being. And when we're united with God and with other people in light, and we're walking in the light, that is a positive conformity. It's a positive unity. So that is a positive side of things. So I'm glad that you asked that, because if we completely throw everything out and say all conformity is bad, well, no. When we are conformed to the image of God, because that's one of the things that the Bible says, the scriptures, the ancient text says, be conformed to his image and to his likeness. Because when you and I and our audience, when we see light, we take on the light and we become light. What we look at grows. What we behold, we become. Whatever we look at and make a contract and a covenant with our eyes and our senses and our entire focus, that's the image that we're going to be conformed into, positively or negatively. So yes, let's not demonize conformity, like doing that completely. There are some negative things to it, but there are also some positive things. And a positive of conformity is to be conformed to the image of God, which I believe for my walk is Jesus, but that's my walk. But the image of God, to be conformed to that, and to be conformed to being light to the world around us, that's the proper type of conformity. That's the conformity that we need. That's the contract that we need.
That's a very nuanced understanding. What I could get is that if the conformity expands your soul's range, that's an alignment. That's a good side of the conformity that you should go with it. And if it shrinks your voice or, diminishes your soul, it's a sign to let's start renegotiating the terms again.
Exactly. Yeah, weighing that and seeing what is light and what is not light. Doing the light and darkness test. What sits well with your spirit, what doesn't.
So I want to ask a very practical question. What would be, if I want to start my mystical journey, let's say, can you give me a 5-minute ritual or something, a ritual that can start since today and my listeners can start since morning?
I would say and I want to make sure that I address this properly, because I do appreciate the question, and that is, the way I would address this, just my own walk in life, is that it's less about ritual or performance or structure. There's still structure, but it's less about striving towards something and more about a posture of a heart. It's like when you put your roots down as a plant and you receive the nutrients, you still have to be in the right position, but it's less to do with time and effort and more to do with just being in the right place. So here's what I would say with that, and I appreciate the question. And that is what I would encourage my listeners to do, encourage everyone to do, is really, whenever you wake up in the morning or you find a few moments in your day, whether you're out in nature, you're in your bedroom, you're sitting on the bus or the train or wherever the location is, it's regardless of that fact. It's the posture. And the posture of the heart is planting your roots deep and being in a place. Being in a place, I'm going to use the example of one of our ancient ancestors, of a man called Jacob. Many of you may be familiar with the term Jacob's ladder, where Jacob was asleep in a certain place. He put the stone underneath his head, and then he had this dream where the angels of God were ascending and descending on the ladder, and God stood above it and said, "Here I am. The Lord is in this place," Jacob, when he woke up from it, and it was awesome, right? Well, he was in a certain place. And the definition of the term certain place in the scriptures is when Jacob had a head-on collision with God. And when we reach that certain place and we put our roots down, that's where God can speak to us and we can speak to God. It becomes a two-way street, because if it's only a one-way street, we create a bog. But if it's a two-way street or a two-way stream, it becomes a river. What I would encourage your audience is this: if you're listening right now, take very close attention to what I'm saying. And that is, find a place that's suitable for you, whether it's in any of those places I mentioned. Close your eyes and just set your mind on things above and speak it out. And maybe you've never done this before. Maybe in your life you've never actually spoken to God as if he's a friend. Not some not somebody far off on a throne or a cloud somewhere, or just or treat him like your work manager or your boss or somebody to be afraid of, but I mean your friend, speaking to God as if he's your friend, because he is your friend, and saying, and inviting God and saying, God, I want you to reveal your nature and your character to me. I invite you to flow through my three-part being, my spirit, my soul, and my body. I invite you to reveal to me everywhere in my invisible life, my spiritual life, my emotional, mental life, and my physical life, the contracts, the constructs, and the conformities, the areas in my life that I need to build, conform into your image, and build those contracts. And those areas that are not in your image and not the contracts you want me to take, or maybe I've made contracts and conformed and constructed areas that are not healthy for my spiritual, emotional, physical well-being. God, I ask you to remove those contracts, to break those contracts. And for the contract that I'm supposed to walk with you, I invite you, God, to strengthen that contract and reveal to me that nature and that character that you are, that you have to speak to me. And I ask you to put me back into the timeline of my ancestors, back to the Garden of Eden, where I'm eating from the tree of life and not from the tree of knowledge, but I'm walking with you in the garden. God, reveal who you are to me in a world where so many different gates or spirits or gods are saying this way or that way. But no, God, I want you to reveal your individual nature and character, your tree of life to me. And that is the prayer, that is the posture, that is the area, whatever way it suits best as far as physically, wherever you are physically. But that is where I would approach to, is treat that opening of that mystical life as a contract with the living God and who God is, and ask God to take an inventory of those contracts and which one is the correct one, which ones are the correct ones with him, and which ones do not serve you. And that, to me, is the place I would start.
Beautiful. In John 3:16, if I'm not wrong, it says that fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. For me, I always interpreted that fear more as like the presence of God, the light of the God. And
Yeah.
you mentioned the whole, sorry for the lack of the right word, ritual. Let that presence of God fill in yourself, fill your body, fill your heart, fill your spirit, and let's just let the God do its work, the work of life that He gives us, and He will, give us life again if we want, the life that we have lost through maybe living life in a way, particular way that was not assigned to us. So yeah, the 5 minutes is very doable for our listeners, and this is a two-way stream. They can check in, receive insight from the God, and then take action.
Exactly. Yeah, and this part 2 to that, just that, what I would have our listeners do. And this part 2, by the way, I understand that people have different belief systems and different approaches, but I'm just sharing my own. And that is, here's what I did when I was 6 years old, when I was a young boy, what I did when I was 6 years old. And that is, I invited Jesus Christ into my heart. I believe that Jesus is the only way, the truth, and the life. And if you're feeling like, oh, I've heard about Jesus before, but not like in the way Caleb's describing, I want to give you an invitation. And I completely respect anyone who does not want this invitation. But for those who are like, my heart is pulling towards what Caleb is saying, then I want you to follow with me as I say this. And that is, Jesus, I invite you to be friend and Lord of my life, the only Lord of my life, the one that is the contract of all contracts, the one that holds all the contracts, the world, the spirit, the universe, the planets, and the earth in your hand. I invite you to be Lord of my life, Lord of my physical life, my spiritual life, and my entire world, my entire life. Everything that I have, I give to you. You are the contract. You are the image. You are the one that restores the way back to Eden. And I invite you into my life to be Lord of my life. And I release everything else that does not serve our walk with you and I. You are the way, the truth, and the life. And that is something that I just will leave there with the audience. And for those who feel that call, they can repeat that prayer, repeat that invitation to invite Jesus to be Lord of your life, because that's what I believe. And I believe that there are imitations, but only the full, true picture of walking in that contract with God and that cosmic confluence can only be with Jesus Christ. So I leave that.
That's so powerful. When you were praying to Jesus, I can feel the power that your words have. That's so amazing. Are there any ways that our listeners can connect to you, like your LinkedIn, your Instagram, your website? Please share with us.
Absolutely. First of all, I'm starting a YouTube channel here the last couple of months. And it's going to be the hashtag, well, it's youtube.com and then / the @ the THE and then SeeLink, SEE and then LINK. youtube.com @ the SeeLink. And subscribers, if you're like, I really enjoyed what Caleb shared. I've heard him on this Cosmic Confluence with Yusuf. I've heard him on BizBlend with Sana. I've heard him on Healthy Mind, Healthy Life with Avik. You've heard me on a few of these different shows now. Just please add me. So hit the bell, hit subscribe to YouTube, and I offer many things like the 3 C's, different stories, motivational content for you as a listener on youtube.com / the SeeLink. Really appreciate if you subscribe to the channel, and then I can share more motivational content with you. Then my website, www.calebmatthews.net, so my first and last name.net. Of course, I can send the information, or I think Santa has it in the inbox afterwards. And then my Instagram, Caleb on the Runway. Back to my modeling days, my modeling years. You can follow me on Instagram as well. Twitter, Caleb Matthews, but without the E, so @ and then Caleb Matthews, but without the E. And then my other business I have in Mexico, I live half a year in Mexico. I'm actually going down there in 3 weeks. San Jose del Cabo, Mexico. My business down there is called The Itinerant Oasis. So that website is www.theitinerantoasis.com. And that is where I rent like an executive condo out, sleeps 1 to 2 people for digital nomads, business professionals, and people who are looking to create online content like you, Yusuf, like me, like our audience, like those who are looking to build their business online, their podcast. Then it's a workspace setup, condo / Airbnb, and you can check that out. And my calendar is open for bookings for this upcoming year as well. But that's a little bit of where to find me. But the main thing is, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, and I would love to have you on board with me in this journey. But this has been wonderful, Yusuf. Thank you very much.
It is our pleasure. I myself will subscribe it very soon. Summing up, if your life felt like a one-way street, tonight offered a turn signal. You can name one invisible contract, swap one survival win for a freedom, practice that one 5-minute bridge ritual to keep the unseen guiding the scene. Choose a contract you'll renew, revise, or release this week, and tell someone you trust, like mother, like your friend, like your colleague. Flow is not a myth, it's a muscle. From Cosmic Confluence, I'm Yusuf. Until next time, let your river run through both ways. Thought to action, sprint to street. You are the author of your agreements. Thank you, my listeners, and thank you so much, Caleb, for this beautiful podcast.
Thank you.